or almost noon. What a wonderful turnout on a gorgeous day today. How many of you are first-time attendees of this fabulous symposium? Hands high. Look at this room. Amazing. Thank you so much for your commitment and wanting to spend a day with the Human Trafficking Task Force of Southern Colorado to get a feel for the issue as it applies to Colorado Springs and the surrounding area. I am honored and humbled to be included with this year's symposium. And so my goal today, and the topic of my talk is Colorado Today, which I will smilingly say, I thought, it sounds like a morning news show. And one theme that I'm going to share with you here for my 25 minutes is to talk about one of the emerging themes that I think not only has happened locally, but statewide, and then nationally. And that theme are the efforts to coordinate. How do you coordinate? And I think the average person likes the idea of collaborating. We know that with the complexities of this crime, people need to start to work together. Coalitions need to form, partnerships need to form. And at the same time, I think it's hard for folks to wrap their heads around what does that mean to really collaborate. Hi. Thanks, Stephen. There we go. And so, for those of you who are new to the symposium, quickly I will share with you, in addition to being faculty at MSU Denver, I am the co-founder and the research director of the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking. And our three primary programs have been very much things like this. And we're getting closer to that 30,000 mark, having done our work exclusively in the state of Colorado. And we've been based in Denver, again, since 2005. In addition to our research, our training, we also conduct community-based research. In other words, the research that we conduct has to serve communities and helps to speak to that piece about collaborating and coordinating. So we've conducted 3 research studies, and in past symposia, I've had the honor of being able to talk about this project. And I'll give you an update as far as the action plan that has come about for the state of Colorado coming out of that research. And then finally, I will make this absolutely shameless plug for you to pull out your cell phones and to plug in the number for the Colorado Network to End Human Trafficking hotline number. This is a 24/7 hotline run by 24 volunteer hotline advocates, and we collaborate and coordinate with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So usually if folks call that national hotline, it gets rerouted to us. And the importance of knowing who has been vetted through our network. We can assure you that with over 300 agencies that are statewide, each of those agencies have been vetted and trained on human trafficking. So if you can plug in this hotline number, 1-866-455-5075, and I'll share with you some statistics from this hotline shortly. But that's our third program at LCHT. And I think the way that I want to talk about this theme of collaborating and coordinating is to really look at it from this perspective. And I'm a psychologist, so not only do I think about the individual, I tend to think about what is the context that surrounds that individual. It's wonderful that you have a symposium here focused in Colorado Springs, and yet your work here happens in the context of what's happening at the state level as well as nationally. I've had the great privilege and honor of being able to sit on 4 federal task forces, and I do feel like it's my ethical duty to be able to share with you what is that conversation looking like at that national level. So that's how I'm going to organize this piece, give you that big picture, and then really come to honor what's happening locally with different communities. So again, as we look at our state and our location, and to piggyback off of the different presentations you've heard this morning, to recognize we are in a unique position to be here in the United States, where folks are trafficked to us, out of us, and through us as a state. Here, so let's look at then how federally these efforts at the state level coordinate and collaborate with what's happening nationally. First, really quickly, from the Department of Justice, Office of Victims of Crime, up in that upper left corner, I'm going to go chronologically to all the things that have happened in 2014. What's wonderful is to see that survivor voice continue to strengthen, both with the CAST LA Survivor Caucus. You also have Sex Trafficking Survivors United, and hotlines, a whole separate hotline dedicated to survivors, run by survivors, provided for survivors. So it's wonderful to be able to see how that voice continues to strengthen, and to echo some of that, to share 1-minute video.
Could potentially become a victim of human trafficking.
I am a victim.
I'll try again.
Human trafficking is slavery.
And it happens all over America.
Any child, any woman, any man could potentially become a victim of human trafficking.
I am a victim of labor trafficking.
I was victim of child sex trafficking, but now I own my body.
Human trafficking is any kind of forced labor.
It can happen to anybody.
I am a mother.
I am an author.
I am a son.
I'm an advocate.
I am an educator.
I'm a sister.
I am a brother.
I'm so much more than what happened to me.
I am strong.
I am brave.
I am outspoken.
I am compassionate.
I am a survivor.
I'm a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor of human trafficking.
So, fabulous video, all survivors, all trying to articulate in a very short amount of time. Everywhere I train, I give them this video. You can YouTube it and look for it on the Office of Victims of Crime website. 1 minute and able to break the stereotypes of what the average person thinks a victim of human trafficking looks like and sounds like. It's particularly effective on my campus at MSU Denver because that's our student body. You just saw their faces and it looks like you. So to share this video widely and to emphasize this piece about the importance of survivor voice. So let me continue to move along then. And to share with you in the spring, the National Institute of Justice pulled together an expert research working group to draw researchers from around the country to have a conversation about the status of research on the issue of human trafficking. And think about that. That's 2014. To pull those researchers together for the first time. It's continuing to give you an indicator of how young this movement is. Not only across the state, only 9.5 years of a movement, compared to 14 years at that national level. So these researchers got together and had dialogue and discussion about, are we all on the same page about how we define human trafficking? How do we measure prevalence? How do we look at the different methodologies to measure prevalence? Knowing all the complexities of this crime and where people are still confusing this crime for child abuse, for domestic violence, for immigrant rights, refugee rights violations. This dialogue is continuing to progress and to move forward. In addition to that, really thinking thoughtfully about how do you incorporate victim-survivor voice. And from my humble opinion, they need to be designing that with you if you're going to conduct research. Technology, we're at the latest of online data technologies and ways to do forensic analyses for us to better understand this crime. And then finally, evaluations. How do we know what exists actually works? But when you have a young movement, you still have folks trying to develop this piece so that we can have evidence-based practices. It's too young, too soon. So that's National Institutes of Justice. In addition to that, Colorado appeared on the list of most improved states under the ranking by Polaris. Polaris also changed its name. They're no longer Polaris Project. They went through their own rebranding this year. So wonderful as far as that. And again, you're going to have a speaker later today talk about those changes in that legislation. In addition to that, the American Psychological Association Task Force, on which I've been honored to be a part, so APA, put out an executive summary and full report of psychological impact on survivors of human trafficking. I'll give you one example. When you are talking about somebody who has had multiple traumas, not only during the time that they were trafficked, but also all those traumas during childhood, what does that mean in terms of treatment? What does that mean to handle and to manage all of those traumas? And if there has been enough trauma and you have been in freeze and submit mode because you have been fearful, what does that do to the brain chemistry? And what are we asking of survivors when we ask them to tell us a linear story of what happened to them? And their brain development has shifted where it's sounding like this. Here, 3 weeks ago, last year, when I was 7, that's how it sounds. And what does that look like on the stand? If you are the key witness, they sound crazy. They sound. So that's where the research continues to develop. We'll make sure that we'll get a copy of this executive summary link out to participants of this conference today. So just to make quick mention of that. Finally, the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families. Quite frankly, they're drowning down there at the border, right? With all of those youth who have come across the borders, they are processing them as fast as they possibly can. And happily, there are some folks who do have the lens of paying attention to those family members who say, I'm their cousin. No, I don't have paperwork, but I can take 3 of these kids off your hands. You've been really busy, but I'm happy to take those 3. And those folks who are processing these kids are saying, thank goodness somebody can take 3 of these kids off my hands. And you know better. That's right for traffickers to come in and say, yep, I'm the cousin. I don't have the paperwork. Happy to get them off your hands. So we need to pay attention to what's happening on the border. Otherwise, the Department of Health and Human Services also had a working group last month where we had folks talk about a 1-day count. So that's on deck. It's probably coming around the corner. How do we take 1 day to count how many survivors of human trafficking are being served nationally? We spent 8 hours dialoguing and debating and arguing around how do you do that count. Okay, so those are some of those conversations that are happening nationally. And then finally, I'll feature this last piece, recognizing that as I transition from national lens to state lens, Colorado got a lot of attention. Additionally, as part of the Operation Cross Country 8 efforts, where we had the highest number of recoveries, 18 juveniles, 11 pimps. So yes, a lot of attention around what is happening around Colorado. And happily, because I was interviewed during this time, we don't want to put out the false notion that there are more people being trafficked in Colorado. My response to that is I think we're more coordinated. And communications and working together is what enables folks to be more efficient in identifying trafficking victims, especially those who are forced into the sex industry as minors. Okay, so let's come back out then as we look at our state. And so what I want to share with you, I'm going to just touch really quickly on some of the efforts, because when we look at our timeline for efforts to combat trafficking in our state, again, to recognize here, we're really talking 2005 and 2006. When we look at that original legislation in 2006, I just want to share this with you. I mean, it's missing force, fraud, coercion language. So this is just a little bit of that language. and to emphasize the changes and the evolution of this field that continues. And I'm not going to take anything away from Dan O'Brien from Shared Hope, who will talk this afternoon about this piece. But yes, there have been changes as of 2014 in May to change and to align that poorly written legislation from Colorado and align it with federal legislation. That's partly why we were one of the most improved states legislatively. Okay? And so here's that bill. And more specifically, all I want to touch on, because Dan will talk about the others probably in his presentation, is this piece and the great hope around this bottom piece. The creation of a statewide human trafficking council to guide Colorado's response to situations of human trafficking. So we have a governor's council, legislatively mandated, for the first time in 2014. How exciting. So here are some of the tasks put before them as we look at them bringing together leadership from community-based and statewide anti-trafficking efforts. I'll give you an example of that in a second. Building and enhancing collaboration among communities and counties within the state. Establish and improve comprehensive services for victims and survivors. Assist in the successful prosecution of traffickers. And then that prevention piece. Help to prevent human trafficking in Colorado. 30 people on this council met for the first time on October 3rd. This is how recent and how quickly this movement shifts. Okay. Then, to be able to illustrate what do we mean when we talk about efforts that are happening across our state. So now I want to bring us from statewide level to different county or community levels. Wonderfully, we have public awareness that continues to improve and to increase. More stories that are featuring human trafficking. We have come a long way as far as talking about this issue. It's getting a little bit easier because now we have news articles that we can point to when we're trying to tell our colleagues that it really exists here in this state. And as part of that, to look, I have different communities that are featured here, community collaborative efforts, and one of those that I will just really note are the efforts here in Colorado Springs with the task force here. And so just to note, what is happening is that there is leadership on the part of our Colorado Department of Human Services that is now bringing systems level folks to the table. Up until this point, there have been a lot of law enforcement, a lot of victim services efforts that have been coordinated and assembled, which is wonderful. But what has been missing up until this point, largely, have been where do the school systems, where do human services, how do those folks enter into these efforts? So wonderfully, we've got the Colorado Department of Human Services that is now tasking different human services departments to weave in human trafficking into their efforts. So wonderfully, we have had efforts here, not only in Colorado Springs and in Denver. I'm here to share with you efforts that have taken place in Arapahoe County, Jefferson County, Adams and Douglas, and then yesterday, Mesa County pulled together folks at that county level to have a conversation about what does this mean for Grand Junction? And I'll emphasize again, this is 2014 for these systems folks to come on board, and it's wonderful. And to have that Colorado Department of Human Services link those efforts to one another. So that, and here I have the hotline next to it, when folks call the hotline, we can even be faster and more efficient in the ways in which we respond to those calls. We have law enforcement calling, we have service providers calling, community members calling in for tips. And most importantly, the number of survivors calling the hotline has increased exponentially over the years that we've been able to manage this hotline. So let me give you a reference point of that. In 2012, there were 65 calls to the statewide hotline. 2013, that jumped up to 115. As of last week, we had 143 calls. So the calls keep coming and the calls keep increasing. I did a quick check out in the hallway just to see how many calls from 2014 from Colorado Springs. There were 31 calls. And for those calls requiring law enforcement response, thank goodness you have somebody in the form of Wendy Etheridge right here, locally. And so she gets those tips that come from us on the hotline to respond. So just to share how that continues to expand. And then my quick update then, as far as our Colorado project. We conducted research by disseminating surveys and holding focus groups. We had over 250 people help to shape a Colorado action plan that highlights strengths and gaps in services. And so wonderfully, we have funders who have come on board. We have folks who are starting to slot in to fill in the gaps noted by 14 recommendations and 42 activities. My hope is by next time around, I'll be able to share with you exactly how that needle has moved forward in terms of filling those gaps, but that is all in progress. Finally, what I want to then talk about, because what came out of that project is this piece about thinking comprehensively. I want to pause just a little bit to illustrate that for you. And so we've talked about where you've got folks who are doing victim services. Those are the protection folks. You have law enforcement and state laws that fall under that umbrella of prosecution. There are also folks who work directly with vulnerable populations, like middle schoolers and high schoolers and migrant farm workers. That's prevention in terms of direct education and know your rights and understand that this can happen to you. And then finally, and coming back to the theme of my overview, is that partnership. How do you work together and not trip on top of each other or get in each other's way? That requires a lot of conversation and a lot of sharing back and forth. So when we say a comprehensive approach, this is what we're talking about. How do these four things come to work together? So I want to illustrate that. Because actually Colorado Springs, Denver, Jefferson County now, Arapahoe County, Mesa County, what happens usually is that there starts to be a training of just a few folks, maybe 20, 30 folks on the issue of trafficking. Sometimes it's housed or hosted by law enforcement, sometimes that's hosted by a service provider. And so those folks start to come to the table. And then folks start to exchange cards and to say, oh, hey, David Shaw, I know of you. I knew that you worked in Colorado Springs PD as a victim advocate. I've known about you. I just didn't know we met on this issue. Oh, cool. Let's change cards. Oh, you know what? More of us should be changing cards. And then maybe we should meet every month. So that's kind of this lovely evolution that starts to happen, and a partnership begins to form, like the Human Trafficking Task Force of Southern Colorado. And then, in assistance and aided by CONET hotline calls, it starts to help to identify what a community has and what's missing. How do we start to fill that in? And then, who else do we need to train? And then that cycle starts to happen. More training comes in. Now you start to train directly to middle schoolers and high schoolers and migrant farm workers. The partnerships start to grow. Again, then the hotline starts to ring. That hotline becomes that indicator and measure of where that training is reaching, because that hotline will start to light up. I'm not surprised one bit that we've had 31 calls from Colorado Springs this year. It's because of all these efforts. That's a testament to that piece, and so on. So I wanted just to take a little bit of time just to illustrate what we mean when we talk about a comprehensive approach and how they domino upon one another, and why not only should there be the 400 plus of you in this room, there should be 400 more who come, just to get updated and just to learn. The last piece I want to share in terms of this comprehensive approach is that it's starting to come in the form of a high-risk victim screening tool. So that's my last update. Different counties, different partnerships that already exist are starting to adopt screening measures where you can identify youth who have high runaway risk or runaway incidences, and generally the flag for that is 4 or more runs in any given year. So anytime you have a youth who has run and it starts to appear on their records, starting to track that piece, starting to look for instances where they have been arrested on prostitution charges, and then you start to tag them or mark their records just to be on that lookout. It's an innovative prevention approach to law enforcement. But this has been a model that's been successful, particularly in Texas. But I'm here and I'm happy to share with you those efforts that start to link Jefferson County, Arapahoe, Douglas, and Adams. Those 4 counties are going to share their databases to be able to identify these high-risk individuals. And so more to come as far as some of these efforts that are happening on the ground. And so I think what I'll do is I'll wrap by just noting, in my time of being able to work on this issue, that collaboration and that partnership piece is critical. But from my humble opinion, I think what that means is that that starts with each of us as individuals. And it starts with what I call earning trust, and then respecting vulnerability. Because once you start to connect with other folks and you get to that place of trust and respecting individual and community vulnerability, yeah, lots of amazing stuff can happen. So, thank you.